Hashtag a mechanic left his own daughter's recital to fix a stranded teen's tire. The girl's billionaire father changed his life forever. Before we begin this incredible story, if you believe in the power of kindness and the beauty of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, go ahead and hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll be glad you stayed. Now, let's begin. The alarm clock on the nightstand buzzed at exactly 5:15 in the morning, the same way it had buzzed every single morning for the past 19 years. Frank DeLuca reached over with a calloused hand and slapped the top of the clock, silencing its shrill cry. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom, watching the first pale ribbons of dawn creep through the gap in the curtains. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like the state of Texas, and Frank had been meaning to fix the leak in the roof for the better part of 3 years now. But there was always something else that needed fixing first. There was always somebody else's car, somebody else's engine, somebody else's problem that came before his own. He sat up slowly, his lower back aching the way it always did these days. He was only 44 years old, but his body felt like it belonged to a man 20 years older. His knuckles were permanently swollen, his fingernails perpetually lined with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed, and his right shoulder made a clicking sound every time he raised his arm above his head. These were the souvenirs of a life spent bent over engines, crawling under cars, and lifting heavy things that no single person should ever try to lift alone. But Frank had always been alone in most things, so he had learned to manage. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and placed his feet on the cold wooden floor. The floorboards creaked under his weight. Everything in this house creaked. The doors creaked. The stairs creaked. Even the kitchen faucet seemed to groan every time you turned it on, as if the whole house was tired and just barely holding itself together. But it was home. It had been home since Frank was a boy, since his father had run the same garage that Frank now ran, since his mother had stood at that same kitchen counter making sandwiches for the mechanics who came and went over the years. Frank stood up and shuffled to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. His dark hair was streaked with silver now, more silver than dark if he was being honest. There were deep lines around his eyes and across his forehead, carved there by years of squinting into engine bays and worrying about bills. His jaw was square and strong, covered in a day's worth of stubble. He had his father's face, everyone always said so, and sometimes when he caught his reflection unexpectedly, he thought for just a split second that his father was still alive, still standing right there in front of him. His father, Victor DeLuca, had opened DeLuca's Auto Repair in 1979 in the small town of Millfield, Pennsylvania. It was a modest shop, just 2 service bays and a tiny waiting room with plastic chairs and a coffee machine that never quite worked properly. Victor had built the business on 2 principles that he repeated so often they became engraved in Frank's mind like scripture. The first principle was that you always do honest work for honest pay. The second principle was that you never leave someone stranded on the side of the road. It didn't matter if it was midnight. It didn't matter if it was Christmas. It didn't matter if you were tired or sick or had somewhere else to be. If someone was broken down and needed help, you helped them. That was what it meant to be a DeLuca. Victor had died of a heart attack in the shop when Frank was 25 years old. He had been underneath a 1992 Ford pickup truck, changing the transmission fluid, when his heart simply stopped. Frank had been the one to find him. He had walked into the shop carrying 2 cups of coffee and had seen his father's boots sticking out from under the truck, perfectly still. Frank had dropped the coffee. He had called out to his father. He had pulled him out from under the truck and held him on the cold concrete floor and begged him to wake up. But Victor DeLuca was already gone. He had died doing what he loved, people said at the funeral, as if that was supposed to be some kind of comfort. Frank never found much comfort in it. After his father's death, Frank took over the shop. He was young and full of energy back then, and for a while, the business did well enough. He married a woman named Catherine, a schoolteacher with kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. They had a daughter together, a little girl they named Lily, and for a brief and beautiful window of time, Frank DeLuca felt like the luckiest man alive. He had a wife he loved, a daughter who made his heart sing, and a business that kept a roof over their heads. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was a good one. But then Catherine got sick. It started with headaches. Then fatigue. Then a visit to the doctor that led to more visits, which led to tests, which led to a specialist in Pittsburgh who sat them down in a sterile white office and told them words that no young couple should ever have to hear. Catherine had a brain tumor. It was aggressive. Treatment would be expensive and uncertain. Frank remembers sitting in that office holding Catherine's hand, feeling the world tilt sideways, feeling everything he had built start to crack and shift beneath him like the ground during an earthquake. They fought it. God, how they fought it. Frank took out a second mortgage on the house. He maxed out every credit card he had. He worked 18-hour days at the shop, taking every job that came through the door, no matter how small, no matter how late. Catherine went through surgery. She went through chemotherapy. She went through radiation. She lost her beautiful brown hair. She lost 30 pounds. She lost the ability to walk up the stairs without help. But she never lost her smile, not once, not even on the worst days, not even when she was so sick she couldn't keep water down. She would look at Frank with those tired, beautiful eyes and say, "We're going to be okay, Frank. We're going to be just fine." But they were not okay. Catherine died on a Tuesday morning in April, 3 days before Lily's 7th birthday. She died at home, in their bed, with Frank holding one hand and Lily holding the other. She had looked at Lily and whispered something that Frank couldn't quite hear, something meant only for their daughter, and then she had closed her eyes and taken one last breath and was gone. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Frank had ever heard. After Catherine's death, Frank was left with a mountain of medical debt, a grieving 7-year-old daughter, and a broken heart that he had no idea how to mend. He threw himself into work because work was the only thing that made sense to him. An engine was logical. An engine had parts that either worked or didn't. You could diagnose the problem, find the broken piece, replace it, and everything would run smoothly again. People weren't like that. Hearts weren't like that. Grief wasn't like that. You couldn't just open the hood and find the thing that was causing all the pain and swap it out for something new. The pain just lived there, underneath everything, like a constant low hum that never quite went away. But Frank tried his best for Lily. Every single day, he tried. He learned to braid her hair by watching videos on the old computer in the shop office. He learned to cook, badly at first, then passably, then well enough that Lily stopped making faces at dinner. He learned to help with homework, which was challenging because Frank had never been much of a student himself. He sat through parent-teacher conferences feeling out of place among the mothers and the few fathers who wore pressed shirts and had clean fingernails. He showed up to school plays and science fairs with grease stains on his jeans and engine oil under his nails, and he clapped louder than anyone in the room because that was his girl up there, his Lily, and she was the best thing he had ever helped create. Lily was a remarkable child. She had her mother's kindness and her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her both deeply compassionate and fiercely determined. She was quiet in the way that observant children are quiet, always watching, always listening, always taking in the world around her with wide brown eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. She didn't complain about the things they couldn't afford. She didn't ask for expensive clothes or fancy vacations. She seemed to understand, even at a young age, that her father was doing the very best he could, and that his best was more than enough. The one thing Lily loved more than anything in the world was music. It had started when she was 8 years old and Catherine's mother, Grandma Rose, had given her a small electronic keyboard for Christmas. It was a cheap thing, the kind you could buy at a department store for $40, with tinny speakers and keys that stuck if you pressed them too hard. But Lily had sat down at that keyboard and started picking out melodies, simple ones at first, then more and more complex ones, and within a few months, she was playing songs that made Frank stop whatever he was doing and just listen. He knew she needed real lessons, a real piano, a real teacher. But real lessons cost money, and money was something Frank never seemed to have enough of. So he did what he always did. He found a way. He talked to Mrs. Patricia Coleman, the elderly woman who played organ at St. Michael's Church on Sundays, and asked if she would be willing to give Lily piano lessons in exchange for free oil changes and tire rotations for as long as she needed them. Mrs. Coleman, who had a soft spot for children and an even softer spot for Frank DeLuca, whom she had known since he was a boy, agreed without hesitation. And so every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Frank would pick Lily up from school and drive her to Mrs. Coleman's house, where she would sit at the old upright piano in the living room and learn to play. Mrs. Coleman quickly realized that Lily was no ordinary student. The girl had what Mrs. Coleman called the ear, an almost supernatural ability to hear a piece of music once and understand its structure, its emotion, its soul. By the time Lily was 10, she was playing Chopin. By 12, she was tackling Beethoven. By 14, she was playing pieces that Mrs. Coleman herself couldn't play, and the old woman would sit in her armchair and listen with tears streaming down her face, marveling at the gift that had been placed in this child's hands. But there was no money for a proper piano. Lily practiced on the electronic keyboard at home and on Mrs. Coleman's old upright during lessons, and while she never complained, Frank could see the longing in her eyes whenever they passed the music store downtown, the one with the beautiful black grand piano in the window. She would slow her steps just slightly, her gaze drifting toward that piano the way other girls her age looked at dresses or jewelry, and Frank would feel a sharp pain in his chest, a pain that had nothing to do with his back or his shoulder or any of the physical ailments that plagued him. It was the pain of a father who couldn't give his daughter the things she deserved. Now Lily was 16 years old, a junior at Millfield High School, and she had been selected to perform a solo piece at the annual spring recital. This was not a small thing. The spring recital was the most prestigious musical event at the school, attended by parents, teachers, local dignitaries, and sometimes even talent scouts from music conservatories in Philadelphia and New York. Students auditioned for months for the chance to perform, and only the very best were chosen. Lily had been chosen to play the final piece of the evening, the closing performance, which was traditionally reserved for the most talented musician in the program. She would be playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most technically demanding and emotionally powerful pieces in the classical piano repertoire. She had been practicing for 3 months, and Frank had listened to her play it so many times that he could hum every note from memory. The recital was tonight. Friday evening, 7 o'clock, at the Millfield High School auditorium. Frank had marked the date on the calendar in the shop weeks ago, circling it in red marker and writing Lily's Recital in big block letters so he wouldn't forget, so nothing would get in the way. He had even bought a new shirt for the occasion, a dark blue button-down from the thrift store that still had the original tags on it. He had tried it on in the dressing room and studied himself in the mirror, trying to see himself the way other people might see him, trying to see something other than a tired mechanic with rough hands and a weathered face. The shirt fit well enough. It would do. Frank went downstairs to the kitchen and started making breakfast. He cracked 4 eggs into a skillet and put 2 slices of bread in the toaster. He poured a glass of orange juice and set it on the table alongside a napkin and a fork. He heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Lily coming down, her hair still damp from the shower, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Dad," she said, sliding into her chair. "Morning, sweetheart. Big day today." Lily smiled, but he could see the nervousness behind it. Her fingers were drumming lightly on the table, the way they always did when she was anxious, as if she were playing an invisible piano. "You nervous?" he asked, setting the plate of eggs in front of her. "A little," she admitted. "It's the biggest audience I've ever played for. Mrs. Coleman says there might be 200 people there. 200 people who are going to hear you play the most beautiful piece of music any of them have ever heard," Frank said. He sat down across from her and reached over to squeeze her hand. I'm going to be right there in the front row, Lily. I wouldn't miss it for the world. She looked at him, and for a moment, she looked exactly like Catherine. The same eyes, the same gentle tilt of the head, the same expression of quiet gratitude mixed with love. It nearly took his breath away. I know, Dad, she said softly. I know you'll be there. After Lily left for school, Frank drove to the shop and opened up for the day. The morning was busy, the way Friday mornings usually were. People wanted their cars fixed before the weekend. There was a Honda Civic with a bad alternator, a Chevy Silverado that needed new brake pads, and an ancient Volkswagen Beetle that belonged to old Mr. Henderson, who brought it in every 2 weeks for something or another, more for the company than for any actual mechanical issue, Frank suspected. Frank worked steadily through the morning, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this work for nearly 2 decades. His only employee, a young man named Danny Rivera, worked alongside him. Danny was 22, a community college dropout with a natural talent for mechanics and a good heart. Frank had hired him 2 years ago when Danny had wandered into the shop looking for work, and despite the kid's rough edges and occasional unreliability, Frank had grown fond of him. Danny reminded Frank of himself at that age, full of restless energy and uncertain about everything except the fact that he was good with his hands. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Frank had finished the last scheduled job and was cleaning up the shop. The recital started at 7, and Lily needed to be there by 6 for rehearsal. Frank planned to close the shop at 5, go home, take a shower, put on his new blue shirt, and drive Lily to the school. He had it all planned out. Nothing was going to get in the way. At 4:30, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was a number he didn't recognize, a local area code but not a number saved in his contacts. He almost didn't answer. He had a rule about not taking new jobs after 4 o'clock on Fridays. But then he heard his father's voice in his head, the way he always did in moments like this, and his father's voice said the same thing it always said. You never leave someone stranded. Frank answered the phone. DeLuca's Auto Repair. The voice on the other end was young, female, and trembling with barely contained panic. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, I found your number online, I don't know if you can help me, but I'm stuck on the side of the road and I don't know what to do. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other like they were trying to escape all at once. My tire blew out and I've never changed a tire before and I don't even know if I have a spare and there's no one around and it's getting dark and I'm really, really scared. Frank closed his eyes. He could hear the fear in her voice, real fear, the kind that comes from being young and alone and helpless in a situation you've never faced before. He thought about Lily. He thought about the recital. He thought about the front row seat he had promised her. Where are you? He asked. I'm on Route 19, about 10 miles past the old covered bridge. I think I'm near a sign that says something about a state park. There's nothing out here. No houses, no gas stations, nothing. I've been here for almost an hour and only 2 cars have passed and neither one stopped. Route 19. That was at least a 30-minute drive from the shop, maybe 40 if the traffic was bad heading out of town. And then however long it took to change the tire or fix whatever was wrong. And then 30 or 40 minutes back. Frank did the math in his head and felt his stomach tighten. If he left right now, he might not make it back in time for the recital. If anything went wrong, if the job took longer than expected, if there was traffic, he would definitely not make it back in time. He should say no. He should tell this girl to call a tow truck, call AAA, call someone else. He should hang up the phone and go home and put on his blue shirt and take his daughter to her recital and sit in the front row the way he had promised. That was what he should do. But then he thought about Lily out there on that road. Not his Lily, but this girl, this stranger's daughter, someone's child sitting alone in a car on a dark stretch of highway with no help in sight. He thought about what he would want someone to do if it were Lily. Okay, sweetheart, listen to me, Frank said, his voice calm and steady the way it always was when someone needed him to be the adult in the room. I want you to stay in your car with the doors locked. Turn on your hazard lights if they're not already on. I'm going to come to you. I'll be there in about 30 minutes. Can you do that for me? Yes, the girl said, her voice cracking. Yes, I can do that. Thank you. Thank you so much. What's your name? Sophia. Sophia Harrington. Okay, Sophia. My name is Frank. I'm on my way. Just sit tight. He hung up the phone and stood in the middle of his shop, surrounded by the tools and smells and sounds that had defined his entire life, and he felt the weight of what he was about to do settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. He was going to break his promise to Lily. He was going to miss her recital, the thing she had worked toward for 3 months, the most important night of her young life. He was going to let her down, and the thought of it made him feel like he was swallowing broken glass.